All right, YouTube, it's time to analyze the political race once again. After probably the March 15th states come in, I'm going to stop making so many political videos. I've had a few people say it's an overwhelming number of politics videos, not enough of the other content. I am going to be doing other things. There are a couple more grimoires in the pipeline and or which have already been released. I'll be covering that soon. But this time of year, sometimes my allergies start up a little bit, and it makes my throat a little bit hoarse because, of course, everything's thawing out. It's actually 70 degrees right now, so the pollen count is, all the stuff that was sort of frozen into the soil over winter is now coming out, unfortunately. But I'm okay right now because I took an ibuprofen. Anyway, with the last round of voting, of course, the states that were up on the GOP side, Michigan, Mississippi, Hawaii, Idaho, we saw I was correct. Trump retained Michigan with no problem. It was funny to see some people worrying about that. They said, "Oh, Kasich will steal the state." No, he didn't have a chance to do that. Mississippi, that was pretty. Even people who hated Trump said he's going to win that. Idaho, a lot of people said they thought Trump would pull off a win there. I said no. At the end of the day, it's almost certain to be Ted Cruz, and I was right because there are a lot of evangelicals in part of the state. You got to realize that there are places in the country that are sort of the fringe of the heartland. Idaho is one of them. Cruz is on an upswing right now. It's not translating into a large amount of support in outside of the heartland, but on some of these fringe states, it is enough to tip the balance. Missouri, I'd say right now, if they held voting, I would expect Cruz to win Missouri. I would expect Trump to take Illinois, North Carolina, and Florida. And I would expect Kasich to eke out a win in Ohio, really. That may change, though. Of course, I believe there's a debate tonight. But the big news was Hawaii. I said I expected Rubio had an advantage, but there were no actual polls available, so people's guesses were kind of across the board. Some people said Trump, some people said Rubio, a few said Cruz. At the end of the night, of course, Trump won handily there. Now, what do we know? That's a closed caucus system, actually, which shows that the former worry, which was that Trump couldn't win in a closed race, obviously was not the case. He won there by as large a margin as he did in Michigan or in Mississippi. So that worry sort of falls by the wayside. And then Hawaii is a state you would expect Rubio to do relatively well in. Most of the voting taking place in, let's say, a few urban centers, and that's basically all that happens. That turned out not to be the case. Trump won handily. That was the news of the night. Rubio, going forward, Rubio falls into one of three categories if he doesn't drop out, unless he does an absolutely spectacular job at the debate tonight. Either really stupid, really stubborn, or bought off. Bought off in the sense that maybe Mitt Romney or Karl Rove or somebody decided to cut him a check. And you see, the establishment within sort of the insiders of the Republican Party, that is the Bush family and so forth, have begun to migrate to Ted Cruz. Why are they doing this? It's clear Ted Cruz cannot win a general election. He's a war-hawking evangelocon. He's basically just Santorum light with a little bit more support because he happens to have won his home state. That's basically all Ted Cruz is. He's going to stall out when the voting gets past March 15th in all of these eastern states. Once Rubio is gone, he will drop out after March 15th. I would expect there's at least some chance he drops out before Florida if he's smart and not being paid for. After Rubio drops out, most of that eastern support is going to swing to Donald Trump. It's not going to go to Kasich because most of Rubio's remaining supporters, his hardened base, think about this. This is the way to analyze it, and this is why my predictions tend to be accurate with regards to these states. Think fundamentally about the diehard supporters behind each candidate and what specifically they are supporting them for. Early on, when Rubio amalgamated his support base, his base amalgamated around him, thinking that because he had the most endorsements, because he had the blessing of the insiders, because he was a centrist, supposedly, he was inevitable in the sense not that he was in the lead at the time, but that over time, through attrition, he would be the last man standing. He seemed quieter, which at the last debate he fucked that up. That's why he declined and all of his softer support left him. He was the quiet candidate. He was the centrist candidate. He's sort of abandoned that now in a race with Ted Cruz to see who can be more conservative, which is a race he can't possibly win. And the concept that he was mentally stable, not out there. He was a safe individual, a safe candidate who could win the nomination. Half of that equation, though, is gone now. He can't win the nomination. It's no longer possible. Even if a brokered convention emerges and Rubio is still in the running, which I don't believe will be the case, he will not be the Republican nominee. That's why you see him not even getting double digits. I mean, he's performing behind Kasich in 3 of these 4 states. He manages to, I believe, or maybe it's 2 now at the final count. But he's doing very, very, very poorly. In Michigan, in Mississippi, he fared very, very poorly in Mississippi. Taking us forward to March 15th, there's something that people who have not been to Florida need to understand. Florida is the tale of 3 states, just as Idaho is the tale of a state in which half the state, roughly geographically, not population-wise, obviously, was on Trump's side, the side closer to the Pacific Northwest, which tends to be more libertarians, paleocons, center business conservatives, the sort of people that like Donald Trump. Whereas the other part of the state was evangelical. They came out in larger numbers. That's where more of the population was. That's why Ted Cruz won. This also informs my belief that Ted Cruz has a slight advantage in Missouri. Not overwhelming, but a slight advantage. Depends on what happens at the debate. Depends on where they choose to advertise. Florida is the tale of 3 states. You can divide it into thirds. The top third of Florida is essentially just part of Dixieland. It's part of the Deep South. It's part of the Bible Belt. It's held by white Baptists. Trump is going to sweep that part of the state. He doesn't even need to campaign there. He probably will. He'll probably go to these locations and hold a rally or 2. But he doesn't really need to. He just needs to make sure that the people show up at the polls, and he's got that part of the state. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. The southern third of the state, sort of the Miami and Point South, is going to go for Marco Rubio. This is the sort of financial and trade-related area, tends to be more wealthy, some retirees and so forth, people with PhDs and so forth. They've been breaking still, even the last round of voting, more heavily for Rubio. Now, he's lost his absolute number advantage to Trump and Cruz now, but he has a higher proportion of them than he can get amongst white Baptists, the people from the Deep South. We've seen Trump now controls the whole Dixieland area, which is why he's going to win, I believe, North Carolina handily. Doesn't matter that it's a closed primary. North Carolinians, being part of that sort of rebel tradition, they're going to jump on board with the rest of the Deep South. So will the people of northern Florida. What does this leave? The middle of Florida, between Tampa and Orlando, a population-rich area, and we've seen this is now roughly echoing at this point. This is why I believe Rubio is at a grave disadvantage in his home state, and he's crazy if he doesn't drop out. In presidential elections for the last few cycles, where Florida has been a particularly important swing state, you see that northern strip of the state going heavily Republican, the southern end going heavily Democratic. We saw this in 2008, we saw this in 2012, and then the center of the state's a swing area that everybody campaigns in and wants to get. Ted Cruz has been down there. He's had robocalls put out against Trump and Rubio. Ted Cruz also wants Florida. There's a remote chance, I suppose, he could get it. By the way, if the voting were held today, I'd expect Rubio to be third in his own home state. It'd be absolute crippling failure. He's not doing well anywhere else. Kasich has a good chance of winning Ohio. Rubio does not at this point have a very good chance of winning Florida. What we saw, for instance, with Hawaii, within a closed caucus system, Trump managed to come out on top because Rubio is hemorrhaging votes towards Donald Trump. Because the hardened support base that has begun to wear away from Rubio now is primarily concerned with can win the election and or can actually be the nominee. I don't want to vote for a loser. Donald Trump is so far ahead in the total number of votes cast, the number of delegates, the number of states that he's won, even if only by a small margin in some cases, and that's the case in certain states and certainly not in others, that he is now the one beginning to attract the can win votes. He's making his case going forward. Yes, I'm the only one who can beat Hillary. We know who the Democratic nominee will be. He is correct when he says this. Hillary will be the Democratic nominee. And another problem that Republicans really should be thinking of this. I say this, I'm giving advice to the GOP as someone who is not within the GOP. I'm a libertarian. My advice is, we saw with Bubba Bill, the Clintons, because of their massive support amongst the black community, which, I mean, it's not deserved, but they still have it, can turn parts of the Deep South into swing states. If you want to counter this, you need a candidate who has a massive amount of support in the Deep South. That happens to be Trump. You need a candidate who can sweep up certain other swing states. You need someone who has done well in a place like Nevada or New Hampshire. Again, Trump. You need a person who can, going forward, solidify, for the first time since old Ronnie Reagan himself, some of the union support under the Republican banner. That's Donald Trump. There are a bunch of Teamsters now campaigning for him up in the Rust Belt. He has those advantages. Ted Cruz does not. Ted Cruz would pull in extra millions of votes among evangelicals. That's not going to help him in a place like New Hampshire. It's not going to help him in a place like Nevada, ultimately, or Colorado. It's not going to help him in any of the swing states other than Iowa. That's a losing strategy. Kasich, while well-meaning, I think, and while he's likely to win Ohio, I believe, again, unless he gets crushed at the debate or something else happens, I would expect Kasich to have a little bit better than 50-50 chance of holding Ohio. I don't care what the polls say. It's like Idaho. The one poll that comes out shows Trump 11 points ahead. I said, well, Cruz is going to win anyway. And he did, by double digits. Why? Because of the demographics. You think about Ohio. All the late voters are going to vote for their governor. Ohio, in order for Trump to win Ohio, he has to be up by at least about 10 points. And the polls don't show that. They show him up by the high single digits, not quite close enough. He'll pull in second. A person like Rubio, if he's even still in, might pull third. You might see Cruz in fourth for a change. And that would be quite something to see, because Cruz is riding high right now. Marco Rubio is nowhere to be found. Rubio, though, was obviously the biggest loser. A lot of people expected him to at least get Hawaii. Now, delegate-wise, does it help him? No, of course it doesn't. Does it really help him in the sense that it's a state that most people care about which way it votes? No. But it's a huge help to Trump on that same token, because nobody expected him to win it. Or at least most people didn't expect him to be particularly competitive there. They had him in maybe a close second at best, but they expected Rubio to win. Rubio is now so low, though, in the polling that he's not even getting double digits in most of these states. I think he got like 13% in Hawaii. I think he was down around 10 in Michigan. He didn't get a single delegate. He didn't break I think in Michigan it was a 15% threshold, and he was below that, and I believe it was a 20% in the other three states. He didn't get any delegates. He now is, even if he won every state going forward, I don't believe he would actually be at the total he needs in order to be the nominee. Well, the problem is that the main argument buffering up his hardened support base, which is maybe around 10% right now, were people primarily concerned with winning the election. Well, if the person can't win the primaries, if they can't become the nominee without a massive clusterfuck of a brokered convention, where's the electability argument? The party comes out of its own convention looking so weak that it almost hands the election to the Democratic Party. Now, from the outside looking in, it wouldn't really make a difference if he was. It wouldn't matter whether Rubio or Hillary won, because they are the same thing. They are exactly the same. They are funded by the same people. They have basically the same ideas. Where's the big difference other than the letter they have after their name? And then that's the other strength of Trump right now. The other strength is that he is on the outside looking in. He's not a long-time, die-hard, uber-conservative, T-evangelist Republican who has an altar dedicated to Ronald Reagan and another dedicated to the Bush family. No, he attacks the Bushes and so forth. And Ted Cruz is now being helped by the Bush family. Make no mistake about it, when people realize that Ted Cruz is rubbing elbows with the Bush family, a lot of the people that like him because they are delusional enough to think he's outside of the same establishment he's in when he goes to the Senate voting, are going to abandon him too. They'll end up in Trump's camp. I hate to tell the Cruz bots here. A lot of those people that make up at least the softer support that Cruz enjoys really would not like the idea of him, again, being buddy-buddy with Jeb Bush, or Carly Fiorina, by the way, necessarily. Meanwhile, Rubio, though, he's already fucked. His campaign is already done, whether he wants to admit it or not. And I would predict this, even if by some miracle he won Florida, I would expect him to drop out the next day anyway. He might drop out after the debate tonight, or whenever it is. I think it's tonight. Might be on right now for all I know. I expect him to drop out either before Florida or, in the day or two after. Because this CNN story talking about his aides speaking of the possibility of dropping the campaign, just giving up. I have a sneaking suspicion that those were campaign staffers. They were telling CNN their real feelings, and they simply didn't tell Rubio. I have a feeling that of those three options, the I'm a stubborn jackass option is the closest to the truth, and these same staffers don't want to let on to Marco Rubio that their own internal polling shows, yeah, dude, you're already doomed in your own home state. You are 20 points behind, with an ever-shrinking war chest just coming fresh off of 2 fourth-place losses in a 4-man race, or maybe 3, depending on what the final voting tally shows in Hawaii. You have no path forward. It's impossible for you to actually become the nominee without a brokered convention, and even then you're probably screwed anyway. Why are you still in the running? It's just going to look really bad. It's not like 2012, when Santorum and Gingrich continued to poll 15 to 20, sometimes into the low 30s, right up until the convention, and kept having at least second place wins in some of these states. Gingrich, other than sort of the Super Tuesday slew of southern states, didn't really win anything else, but he had enough second place showing so that at least he got bragging rights. He got to go up on stage and sort of be under the limelight. Santorum continued to win states well into April. Ron Paul obviously wasn't going to win. He stuck in, specifically because all he wanted to do was rant about liberty and a gold-backed currency. Well, Rubio's not a Ron Paul-style factional candidate. He's not an evangelical who's just hoping to get a TV slot. And he's not a regional person like Gingrich was. He's a national candidate, an establishment, a true centrist insider, supposedly centrist. And yet he can't even break into the double digits in most of these regions. The fact that he was crushed in Michigan isn't good for him. He should have performed fairly well. If he hadn't fucked himself at the last debate and showed his ass on the national stage to 10 million people, he probably would have come in second place in Michigan. He used a Hail Mary strategy, tried to take on the people who were already fighting viciously and insulting each other, and that eroded a large proportion of his softer support that supported him specifically because he seemed soft-spoken, he seemed reasonable by comparison. A lot of these people were, if not scared by Trump and Cruz's rhetoric, they were at least mildly annoyed by it at that point. They supported Cruz because he was quiet, because he seemed like the reasonable individual, sort of the laid-back, relaxed dude who is going to go golfing the next day. When he dispelled that illusion, see what I did there? When he dispelled that fiction that he was a soft-spoken individual and came off as a unhinged berserker who had just swallowed 2 or 3 too many Adderall, because we all know he's popping some sort of pills at these debates on a regular basis now. When he went off the rails, those people, the soccer moms, the pearl clutchers that had been supporting him because he seemed suave and laid back, abandoned him. Now he's just got a very small proportion, and it's essentially what adds up to his long-term hardened support floor, which is what he was at literally months ago. Long before any votes were cast, this is the level that he was playing at. long before he actually rose up. Then he collapsed after Christie hammered him. He rose up again. He fucked himself at the last debate. That was his fault. It wasn't anything that anybody else. It wasn't lying Ted. It wasn't big mean Trump. It was Rubio himself using a strategy that I have to assume his aides told him not to use. They probably said, yeah, take a jab, take a swipe here and there, but be calm, because nobody who's supporting you sees you as the master of insulting others. It's just not a great idea. And instead, he ends up cracking yoga jokes and talking about lies and he's a failure and he's a liar and so forth. When Trump does it, his supporters cheer because that's why they support him. When Rubio does it, his supporters catcall him. And they did, actually. It's funny because you have a debate stage littered with Rubio endorsements and donors, and yet they're actually booing him at the debate. At that point, you knew the death knell of his candidacy was coming. Did I not tell you, after March 5th's voting, Rubio was doomed? Correct prediction once more. I told you Rubio is going to go into steep decline, specifically because he outed himself as being possibly more unhinged than somebody like Trump, who is taking the opposite approach. He's gentling up and trying to be a little bit more sensible. Now that he's got the hardened support, he can then go after Rubio's waning support, and he's doing it successfully. I expect Trump to pull in 3 of the 5 states come March 15th. I expect Cruz has an advantage, not an overwhelming one, but a systematic advantage in Missouri. And I expect Kasich to have at least a slight home field advantage in Ohio. By the way, Trump doesn't need to win those 2 states. He just needs to cement his status as front runner by winning he could just win 2 of them and have Rubio end up winning Florida. It wouldn't matter in the long run, but Rubio's might not even be in by then. So yeah, there's some analysis of last night's voting. My throat still is crackly and hoarse. I'm downing the fluids. It's just so many allergens because it's so fucking warm. It's almost 20 degrees above normal right now for this time of year. You notice I'm out here, on the breezeway, not wearing a sealskin parka. That's good news considering it's still early March. So yeah, Rubio's doomed. Ted Cruz is locked in the heartland. It doesn't matter if people say, oh, well, he's the only viable contender for Trump. Well, then by that token, you should have been saying the same about Santorum. He basically had the same ideology in 2012. He basically won the same slew of states other than Texas. So why weren't people saying, oh, Santorum's the anti-Romney? No, he wasn't. Nobody took him seriously. They understood he would lose. You just happen not to like Trump on a sort of deep visceral level because he's not sucking at the Goldman Sachs teat like Ted Cruz is. There's the problem. That's why he doesn't have a lot of major endorsements. He's still running 4th in endorsements behind Kasich, and yet he's the front runner. This shows his strength as a candidate. And I say again, as somebody unlikely to support him in the general election, he's a much stronger candidate than Sanders. He's a much stronger candidate than Hillary. He is a much stronger candidate than anyone in the GOP field left. The runner-up would be Kasich, oddly enough. If it weren't for the fact that he was such an obvious insider that a lot of independents would just not bother to vote. I would think that Trump, by bringing in the Reagan Democrats and the sort of former yuppie vote and the independents and increasing numbers of minorities, I would think he'd be exactly what the Republican Party would want if it wanted to win a landslide election, get its referendum, get Congress packed with Republicans. Instead, they've spent more time attacking him than they have attacking Hillary Clinton. It's astonishing to see. Can you imagine what would have happened if they had done that to Ronald Reagan? By the way, there's a reason why Trump uses the same slogan that Ronald Reagan did in 1980. There's a very good reason for that. All you have to do is compare their policies, compare what they're saying, compare their backgrounds and so forth, and you'll see for yourself exactly why he chose Make America Great Again. Other people appear not to have noticed this. They think Trump invented the term. He didn't. He took it from Ronald Reagan. What does that tell you? He's really pissed off at the two-party system right now, let's just say that. But that's about all. Peace out.